large corporates move large money because the solutions that they're looking for are worth a lot to them.
And, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that should be enough.
In terms of their pain points, would you say, you highlighted payments, would you say that payments and sort of supply chain, are those the two biggest pain points that they're looking to solve with the blockchain right now on the enterprise side?
I don't know if I'm qualified to say the biggest. Instead, what I'll point out is there's a couple of different areas. There is an enormous amount of money in all of the areas. So you see tokenization for things like real estate, assets, and things like that. That's got a little ways to go. That volume's fairly low. You've got gaming and gambling, which is actually the largest usage today for the most part when you see it on public stuff. But privately, a large number of corporates, like Ripple's making really good advances. Either Ripple or what the Fed's going to do or what Japan's going to do, one of those guys is going to win something where they're going to move international funds. And that's going to replace SWIFT and others. That's got a few years, but that's just a huge market. You've got to understand, international commerce is a monstrous multi-trillion-dollar market. It's probably not going to be solved by one, but someone along here is going to solve that. So for me, it's which is the one? I can't tell you which one's the one. Which one's the biggest number? Probably the banking and international commerce, but honestly, at the point where you start passing into the billions, does it really matter for a startup?
Fair point.
I agree. I mean, cross-border payments is a big deal. We personally actually had this problem at our company. We had engineers in Europe wanted to get paid in Bitcoin because he didn't want to wait for the checks to clear or the wires to arrive. So
And the
that's a big deal.
$60 fee.
And
Yes.
the fee, yes, that's true.
So, this probably wouldn't be a blockchain panel if I didn't at least bring up Libra and what's been happening in the news. So, I think with that announcement, it's gotten at least a lot more attention towards blockchain and crypto. I'm curious just to get your all's thoughts on that platform and, back to what we were talking about before, do you see it sort of moving these technologies in the right direction in terms of creating mass adoption and really doing what these technologies were meant to do?
Maybe I'll start with that one, maybe. So I actually have a different point of view, I think, than most. I think Libra is great because they're basically going to do all the legal fights, settle all the legal problems, and then all the startups will come in there and pretty much create the real value. I don't think it's actually going to succeed as a product, but I think it's going to be great because they're going to pay the $2 billion in legal fees to try to clear this thing in 160 countries, and it's going to allow all kinds of other things to exist. They're going to clear out a ton of issues. They're just going to be forced to settle those issues, which will allow everybody else. It's like a big boat creating a wake. I think in the end, they're not going to be able to make it big enough because so many countries will have so many exceptions and so many issues because it's Facebook and because they're corporate, because it's corporate money and it's obvious to governments that this is a direct threat to them and they can do something. It's hard for them to do something a bit, but Bitcoin, they can do something illegal. It's literally a target on their back. And so I actually don't think it's going to exist the way, I do think it'll succeed partially as a peer-to-peer ability to move small amounts of money type stuff, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere near the replacement for the financial system that they sort of secretly intended to be. But I do think they're going to do a lot of legal fights which will allow things like Ripple and all the rest to move forward. There is no way for companies, except for a handful, to afford the legal fees, but Facebook can. So for me, I think it's great. I'm like, go ahead, here's this, and as far as I'm concerned, they're basically what's called tanking. I don't know if everybody remembers that, knows what the expression means. They're basically gonna roll out and be the target, and the rest of us will actually get something done. Yeah, unpopular opinion, by the way. I did a speak on that about last week, and people were not happy about my opinion.
So I'm going to try to top that in terms of being controversial. So if your question was about stable coins, which is what Libra is supposed to be, right? It's a stable coin. In my opinion, there are two kinds of stable coins, the centralized stable coins and then the impossible stable coins. The centralized ones obviously don't have any of the underlying chain guarantees, right? They're completely centralized, censorship prone, but they help you transfer money. You can build applications on top of it like Libra. And like you said, they have a huge target on their back, they'll fight a lot of battles and then hopefully provide a lot of regulatory certainty for the startups that come after them. The impossible stablecoins are the real perpetual motion machines, right? The algorithmic stablecoins. They shouldn't exist, they just scam.
So algorithmic central banks, no.
I mean, you can't stabilize the price of anything against anything. This is basic economics. People's, demand and supply keeps changing all the time. There is no absolute stabilization of exchange rates. This is like one-on-one.
Maybe the easier one is there's a great paper published by some economists that explain why it's impossible. It basically, he uses the term perpetual motion machine. There are certain ways in which you can never have a stablecoin. It's just mathematically, it always will fail over a period of time. You run these things called Monte Carlo simulations, and eventually it always fails. It always runs into a problem where it fails at some period of time within a reasonable time expectation, and that's, I think, what you're referring to.
Yeah, it's more than that. It's not just that it's a technical or mathematical or computational issue. It's just you're working against the laws of physics. It's an information problem. You have to be able to read the minds of future human beings to be actually able to stabilize exchange rates of anything versus anything else. So it's just impossible. But there's a lot of speculation in the market. I mean, they're not the only people trying to do impossible things. Crypto is full of things like that. So asset-backed stable coins do serve a real purpose. People want to be able to do their accounting and profits and losses, and they want to build applications. You don't want your assets value to fluctuate 30% per day. So there's a real need for it, mostly as an accounting measure and a way to park your money during periods of extreme volatility or when you're not actively trading.
Maybe I can kick in too, for enterprises, they don't want to deal with the volatility. You want to pay bills and be able to
Right.
forecast because they get held to a quarterly statement, so they can't deal with it. The second thing they need is privacy, but we'll deal with that at another topic, another time.
So with Libra you get nothing. But like you said, it may pave the way for people who come after.
I don't know if you get nothing, but I understand the statement. But conceptually, tying into a basket, there are some pros and cons there. Remember, conceptually what they're going to do is take all your money, and they're going to hold on to the money for you and give you basically a token that represents it. That's the concept. The reality is they're going to take all your money, they're going to lend it out, they're going to make money on your money. They get to hold all your money, so boy do they make a lot. And if they hold trillions and trillions in reserve, they can really control banking systems. So you can do anything you want with your Libra, they get to keep your money. So works out pretty well. But the problem with that is that it has so many regulatory issues that it has to cross. They're literally crossing across every single major regulatory problem all at once. So it's just hard, even for Facebook.
I agree.
I'm curious, thinking about maybe stable coins over the long term, if we think back to the US dollar was pegged to gold at one point, now it's free floating. Do you see stable coins being pegged to, whether it's commodities or fiat currencies, as more a way to stabilize them?
Yeah, I mean, asset-backed, fully collateralized, freely redeemable at all times, like parity and convertibility, that's a given, right? That's basic answer is, okay, if you want to stabilize an asset against anything else, take 100% collateral, put it in a place, don't lend it out, don't do fractional reserve, and simply make it frictionless for convertibility. That's the easiest way to do it. But the problem is, it will always be centralized. Right, the blockchain doesn't magically entangle with the real world to know where your money is, whether it's sitting at the wall.
Brick is somewhere.
Right, so you need an oracle or some kind of a prediction market, which doesn't exist yet, by the way. So you're trusting some entity to redeem and maintain that reserve ratio or the collateral at all times.
At some level, that's what the governments do today. Think about it. We trust in the federal government. Today, we trust the Federal Reserve. All money in the banks are basically electronic, and the Federal Reserve simply says, yeah, trust us, right? We trust it because it's such a big government entity that it's within the interest, and there's so many people involved and so many procedures, so many safeguards that we trust it. But would you trust Facebook?
So that's the thing. I mean, for fully asset-backed stablecoins, I think there will be many use cases if you're willing to forego the centralization and the censorship resistance, which is the other big. And I think there are use cases where they will be needed. Frictionless.
I think it's very viable for a lot of corporates. There's a large number of corporates who will use it for international transactions, or I think there is there's a large number of use cases that it is really good, but it is not a panacea. It's not going to solve a lot of problems. In many cases, corporates don't care if it's centralized, right? You trust your bank, they're centralized, okay, I'm okay with that. Well, it's censorship, well, shit, I'm a company, I'm going to get censored all the time anyway, all the governments are going to be out. So, hey, it's a little cheaper, I'll take it. Don't try to solve all the problems with it. It does solve certain problems and has certain uses. And that's why it is useful. I'm just saying is, most people present the problem is, does it replace? And that's a much harder statement. But it might augment and be useful for many different situations.
I agree. Yeah, different strokes for different folks. I mean, different applications, different trade-offs.
I mean, Tether, 50% of Tether is Chinese, is held by Chinese or traded by Chinese. It is a great way to go RMB to anything. And they figured that out.
And then that, despite the fact that there have been rumors and tremendous amount of FUD floating in the market about them not having any collateral sitting anywhere in the world, right? And even after the New York Attorney General sued them, the price didn't budge. So there's a tremendous amount of demand for private, censorship-resistant, in the general sense, at least from governments, which is why all of these fully regulated, fully collateralized so-called stablecoins still can't compete with Tether, despite all of that negative sentiment in the market. So it's the
market
demand
is
is
exactly
clearly
rational,
there.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
the
mean,
demand is
we
clearly
knew
there.
that in 2007 with the bond markets and everything else, where it was literally completely irrational. But it's the same thing. Tether is highly resistant because the number of people that are invested in it are so heavily invested in it. I don't know how far we can take this conversation. We'll probably get pretty quickly boring into the details of it. But conceptually, this is one of those same things where you have with religion, where you get fanatics into it. They really don't question. There's how much information you present to them, they will always find an excuse or a conspiracy or something to explain it. So at some point, people get very vested in an idea and can stick with it. And oftentimes it dislodges for a random, unexplained thing, and then it cascades, which is the same thing that happened in 2000, 2007, 2008 with our financial crisis. But when it does, it's a very bad cascade. Long-term capital management, those who remember, went bankrupt because they bet on a few basic things, but in fact, one of those things broke. Tether very much should not, there's no, like, if you look at it rationally on the math, it just should not have existed. It should have been destroyed. They really don't have that money. They're literally, it's a bunch of guys going, hee, they haven't figured it out yet. And people haven't, but it does. And people are still moving a lot of money through it. So if you want a rational world, you're not coming in this world. So sometimes you have to accept the irrationality of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know for sure where Tether's money is or if they have it, but the one thing I can say is that there's a huge premium on avoiding the regulatory pitfalls that other fully collateralized stablecoins do come with. So the risk premium tells me that the demand is so much more on preserving that property of, pseudonymity or censorship resistance, at least for a large segment of the market.
Yeah, and I might point out, you might release the same coin and it would be a total failure because it has absorbed all the market that wants that and is willing to pay for that risk. And for example, I'm not saying it's true, I got approached a little while ago to do a $1 billion, we'll just call it a token offering, a little complicated, from a bunch of casinos. They wanted to do it, and there was a very, very complicated situation. And at some point, I finally came back to him, I said, it was the single largest, most complicated structure I'd ever seen in my life. It was $1 million legal fee to set this up. And I asked them, I said, why are you doing it this way? And it basically came down to, because if the police come, there's no way they can catch us. That's basically the answer I got. And they were willing to spend enormous amounts of money to ensure the integrity of the system, absolutely. So there's always going to be some people who will pay a premium for some product. It's called product market fit. Tether has product market fit with a very specific group. Doesn't mean anybody else will ever get it. Doesn't mean anybody else cares about it. For a very specific group of people, it has product market fit. Stable coins will continue to have that, whether they're backed or not, or whatever it is. There are groups of people who want it for a specific reason. I don't know how many there are. I don't know how big that market is, but the evidence says that there are at least some people, and they're willing to pay that premium.
Right. For the others, there will be other options.
Right.
And eventually, the ultimate solution is, if you do have a decentralized state-free money like Bitcoin, it will be stable. I mean, if you go look at prices when we had from 1800s and 1900s, when we were on the gold standard, the supply didn't need to be actively managed. There was a slow, predictable growth in supply. CPI in the UK and US actually was fairly stable, practically stable during those entire 100 years. So once you get to that, full issuance, everybody adopts it as money, generally accepted medium of exchange, it will be stable. Sound money is kind of tautologically stable. So you'll get there. This is an interim phase where we need these stable cryptocurrencies. And like you said, Tether is one segment of the market. There are other smaller segments of the market, at least now.
I have just a very slight differentiation. Over a large period of time, there is a challenge though, because it's a fixed supply. Some money is lost, things happen, people lose passwords. Over a period of time that you have basically have a constraining supply, there is some challenges if velocity never picks up.
Right, so this is actually a pretty extensive argument in terms of which is more important. Is it the growth in actual money supply or is it the predictability? And I actually think the predictability is much more important than the decay schedule of issuance, like the Coinbase reward.
So
But,
for those of
you
you who
know,
want to follow the discussion, basically, I apologize to interrupt.
Sure.
Basically, with a fixed money supply, it basically means the value of any given coin is always going to continue to increase. It's just nice, easy predictability. You know it's going to always be more and more in demand. More and more people want to use it, therefore it's always going to increase. The problem is that also means people hold on to it. They don't spend it because it's increasing in value. So they see it as an asset, not as a currency, which creates even more pressure on the price to go up. So it becomes not useful as a currency, but becomes very useful as an asset. So a fixed money supply will tend to move to asset, where a managed supply will tend to move towards quote unquote currency. Not absolute, but just that's what we're sort of debating back and forth. Depends. My point, I want Bitcoin to be a currency. I want it to dominate the world. I want it to be spent, not held as an asset. But a fixed supply, it makes that more challenging. It means lots of people are just going to hold on to it, which means reducing what my term, which was velocity. Money tends not to be spent. On average, a large portion of Bitcoin has been held for more than 5 years without being spent. I forget what that number is, 80 something percent, I think they posted last week.
80%.
Yeah, around 80% is held more than 5 years. There's no velocity, so you have lots of value, but people can't really use it. I'm of the opinion I want it for personal reasons to be a currency, to put a check and a balance to shitty government economics. Governments that blow the economics, people are going to move their money out, and all of a sudden governments get nailed. When Venezuela really screws up, everybody moves their money to Bitcoin, all of a sudden governments have to behave, or they lose control of currency. They lose control of their own economics. So the biggest threat to them is that there's a freaking check and balance, which is what I want. Which is why I don't want it an asset, I want it to be a currency. But that's a personal belief that is not a statement of fact or economics.
Right, that's actually one of the two ways people do think about this, and this is an ongoing debate in crypto, especially in Bitcoin. For anyone who's interested and who's probably bored by now about this, I have an article, a series of 4 articles coming out about the price determinants of Bitcoin. One of those things is how the supply-demand equilibrate dynamically over time, and how the predictable supply actually helps that. But this essentially is the Keynesian versus Austrian argument in economics. It's what is more important? Is it the monetary velocity? Is a deflationary currency a Pareto bad thing, right? There's different opinions. I don't think we're going to settle it today. I am on the other side of that debate, but yeah.
Depends what you want to accomplish.
Yeah, you will get there. Whether or not the supply is absolutely constrained, you will still get to a generally accepted medium of exchange, because all you're essentially forcing people to do is lower their time preference, which is you save more. But when your life is on the line, no one's going to actually refuse getting a cardiac stent just because Bitcoin's going to go up value. So it just bends the demand curve. Doesn't absolutely eliminate spending. The problem is, if you need transaction volume to actually get through these many speculative cycles to bootstrap a free market currency, it does present a hindrance. But with layer 2 solutions, I don't think that'll be an issue. With Lightning and what we're doing, yeah, I don't think it'll be an issue.
Depends what you want to accomplish. So for me, I want a check and balance to government because most governments today don't have a check and balance to crappy economics. Bitcoin, blockchain, a bunch of others provide that. Blockchain provides, right now, all of you, your identities are based on the US government, right? Your driver's license, your passports, your banking, all that's based on government validation that you are who you say you are. Moving that to the blockchain, and then moving your money to the blockchain, you've now removed a huge amount of government power over you. You now have a lot more freedom, which is also, another way to state that is, there's a check and balance. If the government does a shitty job of managing the economy and they run up a huge debt, you can exit the currency substantially. Well, that creates an enormous incentive for governments to either correct or basically disaster strikes. But you're not there. You've moved your money elsewhere. That whole check and balance is necessary because today what we see is most governments today don't have a check, so they literally do incredibly bad economics. As being, as my background in economics, I did a lot of work. Most governments, due to the lack of check and balance, dramatically do certain things such as deficit spending and things like that. It's literally irrational spend because they're short term, they only care about their term in presidency or whatever. If you can exit your currency, that check provides an enormous pushback on bad behavior. And that's, I think, a necessary thing going into the next era as we move forward. But
Sure.
But it is-
Keeping the government power in check, who's not for that, right?
Exactly. Well, I hate to pull us away from this. This is a great conversation. I do want to move on though to talking a little bit about, the disruption that blockchain brings and, across a broad swath of industries. But rather than focusing on the industries, I'd love to hear from you guys. What are the broad characteristics that you think makes a specific industry most ripe for disruption due to blockchain? And if you could come up with one or two examples that kind of fall into that criteria.
That's a very difficult question in the sense that things that don't actually have a lot of value coming from activities that take place in the real world are not easily amenable to a blockchain solution. Just because you don't have a connection, an oracle that writes and reads data from the blockchain, right? You're still trusting a third party or a series of or set of third parties to actually do that function for you. Peer-to-peer financial contracts, on the other hand, definitely can be done. Smart contracts, which are essentially peer-to-peer financial contracts that are universally normal, right? And then you can execute transactions on them, you can build increasingly more complicated contracts on them. Insurance is one. Again, the problem is there's a lot of jurisdictional, legal, regulatory hurdles for something like that. What you see now with derivatives, just betting on the price of Bitcoin, futures contracts, options like what BitMEX does. Their notional volume is $1 trillion last year. It's crazy. So those are huge applications, and there'll be a lot more coming.
So I'm going to leave the whole financial sector. I'm just going to skip because he's sort of covered it. So instead, so conceptually, I'll cover it at a higher level. When you look at any, forget blockchain, forget any technology. It's a technology. It enables certain things. It has certain things that it can do. So think about it in the way of what does it do? It creates immutable record. So when is immutable record really useful, right? It creates, if you have a distributed or no ownership, when is that useful, right? There's a series of questions that you can ask yourself as to what it enables, and then you're just looking for things that meet those characteristics. So I mentioned it before, but I'll give you a couple of simple examples, right? Your identity is all tied to the government. If you're in a country where you don't trust your government or don't want to be associated to your government, that's incredibly valuable. If you could establish bank accounts, buy things, identity and everything without having to use your government because you didn't trust your government, that's incredibly valuable. In the US, we generally trust our government. We forget that well, maybe not today, but we used to trust our government. But in many countries, that's really not true. So that's the value. So where do I look is there's about 5 or 6 main questions for blockchain. The immutable record, the non-corporate ownership, right? The ability to do what we call public but private, meaning everybody knows it, but nobody can actually change it, that sort of thing. By the way, the mic, I think, is dead.
You want to swap here?
That's okay. I've got a big...
We can hear you.
Yeah, I figure everyone can probably hear me.
Yeah.
So, so what you're really looking for is things that meet their character. Some examples of this, of companies that are very successful. Obviously, on the trading volume, it's just a really good way to do trading or gambling or gaming, however you want to do it. Instead of trading on a stock market, you can trade on this market. So, works really well, opens it up to the rest of the world, lots of interesting engagement. So it met the need fairly quickly. Exchanges work well. Some of the other things that are coming up and growing are authentication, right? That's that whole area. E-commerce is coming up in that international commerce. Not within a country. If you're selling within a country, it's fairly quick and easy. But anything across borders is really complicated. If anybody's actually, how many people have actually tried to do a shipment between China and the United States? Anybody? Okay. The number of documents is enormous. Dozens, at the very least, hundreds in most cases, and both governments won't accept the other government's document. So you have to write completely different sets. And I kid you not when I say this, there's literally a piece of paper attached to a shipping container. And if the piece of paper is lost, the container's dead. You can't get anything out of it, you throw the whole damn thing away into the recycle bin. Could be millions of dollars of electronics. If that piece of paper is lost, that's a piece of paper written in Chinese with a special stamp on it, there is no replacement. It is gone. And that whole container is locked up and never seen again. Dumb happens all the time. These sorts of things where outside authority can step in is super useful. Make sense? And the last one is international currency movements, just general currency movements. Really, really painful, very difficult. SWIFT works pretty shitty, but it works, you don't really notice it. But for a company that moves money, even with one developer, you quickly notice how bad that system is. So those are the things I look for. So instead of looking at it that way, I look at it and say, what are the key characteristics it solves? And then look for something that meets those characteristics.
Bear with me.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Wow.
Suddenly got louder.
Oh, I get it. His mic's on, my mic's off. I get it. I get it. I'll shut up. It's fine. It's fine.
So cross-border payments definitely, and there's other applications like he pointed out, distributed identity. Microsoft is actually using the Bitcoin blockchain to do distributed public key infrastructure. So that's an exciting application. I also think information markets like social media, where you don't want one or a group of entities actually controlling the flow of information between people. That is a definite application for blockchain. Maybe not the Nakamoto consensus, but maybe the Stellar consensus protocol or something else like that. You can incentivize people, the stakeholders, right? The content creators, the consumers, all of that stuff. So I think, yeah, those are some
Payment
of the
flow.
payment flow, exactly. So
Should
some
be
of the
useful like
industries that-
music too, like music, payment
digital
flows,
rights
royalties.
management, like music, etc. Yes, for sure.
That's great.
I think the way I view it is more like, you're really talking about like a database. Think about it when databases first came out, right? You could do anything with a database, but it's a tool. Blockchain's a tool. You can integrate it in thousands of places. It does enable a few things that really are new, but mostly it just enables what we could do before, but we didn't think we could. We didn't, oh, that's just impractical. And now it's just practical. Test. Woo, it works. Ha 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 ha.
Great, well, thank you guys. One last question for me before we open it up for the audience, and it's just, for anybody out there that's trying to break into blockchain or crypto, what kind of advice do you have for them?
Well, I'd say instead of trying to go and learn all of these different elements, I mean, because it's very complicated, right? Economics, game theory, computer science, all of that stuff. Instead, find a team that's actually doing the right things and growing fast, and join them, and then you'll learn a lot more, a lot faster than trying to come up with some of it on yourself.
So,
Just because it's so new.
I would agree, but I have a slightly different point of view on it. We've now moved into the age where a lot of the infrastructure is there already, so don't start thinking about that. What are you an expert in? What problem really bothers you? What can you solve? Look for the problem that you can solve. If it uses blockchain, it uses blockchain. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So don't chase the tech. What are you an expert in? What big problem? What has a really good market? What friends can you recruit to solve that problem and come join you? Can you accomplish it? Go out, do a quick market test, see if it's good. Whether you use blockchain or not, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Don't ask that question. Figure out the expensive problem that you uniquely can solve, and you'll be able to build it. And again, don't ask, I'm going to build a blockchain company. That's 2 years ago.
Fully agree with that. Not just for blockchain, but for anything else. You don't want to do an AI company, right? You want to solve a problem like
Yeah.
this.
Right.
AI is just a tool.
Very good. Well, that is all the questions that I have, so I think we have about 12 minutes for any audience Q&A. Cool. Start.
Hi. So I bought.
He's your replacement.
So
I'm sorry, for those who don't know, we accidentally thought he was.
Yeah, we had an awkward introduction, right? So I bought Bitcoin in 2014 at something like $300, and
Congratulations, yeah. Did you keep it?
I exited it at 6,000, something like that.
That's still not too bad.
Yes, until I started hearing from my dad's milkman in India that he wanted to buy Bitcoin, right? So my question to that is, do you think the market sentiment is ever going to move from Bitcoin being an asset to a currency? Like as you.
Okay. So I'm going to first say it's just personal opinion. I have no real data information on this. I'll simply say he talked about the economic models earlier, and I was talking a little bit about that as well. At the point where it really needs to be a currency, basically as more and more people adopt it and there's more and more demand, it simply moves into the currency. What I'm not clear on is if the supply constraint becomes so much and the holding, basically people hold on to so much of it that such a small percentage is used, that the skyrocketing value prevents it from becoming a currency. That's my concern. He has a different opinion, he can state it. But I think what I would say is It's not clear to me if it will will always be an asset. That's not clear to me. But I also say, as an economist, I tell everyone, forecasting is really, it's a game played on TV to get money, but it's not a game you actually think you're gonna win, right? I used to do this all the time. We'd record two things. We'd make two forecasts, one high, one low, record both, right? It's like an A/B test. You just keep running A/B tests. And eventually half the time you're right and half the time you're wrong. And you just record enough of them where you're always sort of right after a while.
So it was intended to become money, right? It wasn't intended to be a speculative asset forever. But right now, it is a speculative asset, there's no question.
Yeah.
It is not considered money by any accepted definition. It's not a store of value yet, because it's too volatile for that. It is not a medium of exchange that is generally accepted. No one uses it for transactions. It just doesn't make any sense. The opportunity cost of not holding it prevents you from spending it. It's not a transaction currency. But that is a necessary phase you have to go through to actually bootstrap a currency. You can't have a medium of exchange without being able to store value for extended, unknowable periods of time. So that's the hope. When it happens, whether it'll happen, who knows?
But
We're all hoping that it will. And then there's a good possibility that it will.
it has
That's
to
it.
stabilize for that.
It's also possible that it stays an asset and that other altcoins or other coins take over as a currency. Tether or something like that, which are stable. I don't want to forecast. Again, it's a bad thing I feel for us to do here. It's just not good thing.
Right.
All I can say is there is an expectation of it moving to currency. There is certain conditions that must be met, but one of them is it has to stop being volatile. It has to everybody's expectation cannot be that it's going to skyrocket in value, or else people just won't spend it. Does that make sense? So the statements he made about it, when those are true, it becomes a currency. I'm not at all convinced BTC, that's, I'm gonna be very specific, becomes that. I think it's going to be an asset. I think we're gonna end up spending other currencies. But purely opinion. I got no data here, I'm flipping coins.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Two questions up here.
Hi, my question is, what do you think about the usage of blockchain in more manufacturing businesses? Because like right now, I come from
Like traceability, like MES systems, ERP, produce tracking, fraud.
I understand that from traceability. I was more talking about the more manufacturing, like fashion, LVMH and Kering. They are adopting this technology in
So
their
the
brand.
fashion industry is using it for anti-fraud, is that what you mean?
No, they are trying to use also for tracing, for example, leather since the beginning to the end. But to me,
Right.
sounds kind of strange because, for example, if you go to leather companies, they don't have the technology to transform their business into data. So I was wondering what you think about if companies start using blockchain also in this kind of.
Let me see if I've understood. Are you asking about the connection between the physical world and the electronic?
Yes.
Okay,